Good evening, I'm Greer McGeary, President of Seahorse Victoria. With me tonight is the Victorian LGBTIQA Community Commissioner, Joe Ball. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you so much.
Before we delve into what being a LGBTIQA Commissioner is, a little bit about yourself, like your earliest memories.
Well, everywhere I go, I talk about being proudly transgender, and I am a transgender man. I use the pronouns he and him, and that's important to me. And I also talk about being proudly because we live in a time where we're told not to be proud of being transgender. So I lead with that and say I'm proudly transgender, and that's important to me. It's a huge part of my identity. Other parts of my identity, if you get my earliest memories, I grew up in Brisbane, Queensland. And sometimes I joke about that makes me a pineapple. And, you know, that has played a huge part of my role of spending, you know, the first part of my life there.
What sort of residual effect of the Joe Bjelke-Petersen era has impacted life in those early days for you?
Yeah, so I grew up where it was criminal to be homosexual, which for me meant that through most of my schooling, it was never spoken about. I also grew up with the background of the HIV crisis was going on, but in the political climate I grew up in, I didn't know as a child. In fact, my earliest memory, so if you're thinking about like, I was 10 years old, this is the first time I sort of heard a discussion of HIV, which was ravaging particularly the gay male population at that time, thousands of people dying. The first time I heard about it was in 1990. I was 10 years old and I was in playing trumpet in the school band. And we were all mucking around. Anyone who's played a brass instrument knows there's a valve on brass instruments where you release your saliva. And I was doing that, and as kids, we were all joking. Someone said, "Oh, watch out, you might get AIDS." And I remember the conductor, who was a teacher, music teacher, he said, "Everyone stop." And he said, "I want to tell you that not to joke about this." And he said, "You cannot get AIDS from that little bit of saliva. You'd need 20 buckets of it." Which is something that apparently people said at the time to allay people's fears. They said it's 20 buckets. I mean, and that was some of the messaging that was coming out of the HIV. I didn't know that, but that was, and I remember, but what I think back on that is that that guy was an ally. I mean, maybe he was even gay himself. He wouldn't have been able to be out and gay as a school teacher in Queensland at that time. But I remember that as one of my earliest allyship moments of someone just saying, "No, everybody, this isn't a joke."
So with that positive, in effect, positive statement from the teacher, what sort of thoughts were in your mind about who you were at the time? Were you having doubts about yourself?
Looking back on it, you know, I had a lot of uncomfortableness in my gender, definitely. And way before, later on, I would sort of come out as a lesbian and bisexual, and, you know, that was when I was 16. But from very early age, I didn't feel comfortable growing up as a little girl. And I found ways to live with that, and some of that was being a tomboy, which was a term that was allowed, you know, which allowed you to wear different clothes and behave different ways.
Climb trees and all that sort of thing.
But I definitely remember early concerns that my parents had. You know, like, it's hard to creep in. They were a bit worried about how I was presenting myself gender-wise. And I didn't have any frame to reference that, but I was aware of their anxieties.
That's, I think, a fairly common thread with a lot of us, in the sense that we knew something's not quite what we are being presented as, but don't know how to express it, don't know, not having heard of it or anything like that.
There was also this idea that you can do that for a certain period of time. And I remember that, and then you got to grow up. Like, you know, I remember someone saying to me, you know, at some point you're going to have to learn how to put on makeup, and, you know, not that women have to do this anyway, but, you know, like this was, I think these are little memories that I have of people's what I take them as is their concerns about, that I was carrying on this gender, as they would have seen it, confusion a bit too long. You're allowed to play for a certain period as a kid, but at some point they want to see that, you're following the script that
So that's sort of from your parents and other adults. What about your peers?
It's interesting. Like I remember by the time I was in grade 7, there was a kid in grade 4 who, looking back on it, was obviously a trans boy and lived as a trans boy, assigned female at birth, and they were allowed to wear a boy's uniform. I was at a public school, but we had a uniform, and was allowed to wear a boy's uniform, dress as a boy, and act as a boy, as it was then. And I was very aware of how wrong most people thought that was, and that they thought that child was unwell, and that not enough was being done to like pull in that child, and that child was doing that, which must have meant, I would love to connect with this person. I don't remember the name or anything, but I was thinking, wow, they were living their life that way, and it was completely unacceptable, really. But there was obviously they had some support somewhere that was allowing them to do it, and that child was just so forthright in themselves. But what stayed with me, the lesson I got from that was like, I heard what everybody said behind their back. My peers, the teachers, and the message was like, you're sick and you're wrong. And that was,
And of course that has the impact then on the likes of yourself of clamming up.
Completely. Like I think if that child had been embraced and people had said things like, you do you, or, like I've been like, you're loved no matter what, or you're perfect the way you are, or God makes no mistakes. If I've heard these kind of messages towards that child, it would have been a very different journey for me.
You use that phrase, God doesn't make mistakes sort of thing. Was there any sort of religious aspect to your upbringing?
Interestingly enough, I was really interested in religion as a kid. It was quite spectacular and magical. So growing up, kids don't have to do this anymore, but growing up in Queensland in this time under a National Party government, under Joe Wilkie-Peterson, we had compulsory religious education in primary school. So I had once a week people from the community, quite random people, come in from the community who would represent the local churches, Uniting, Catholic, Anglican. They'd come in and run half an hour once a week. So you couldn't escape it. So I think I had it at school probably more than home.
One of the most important things I learnt was from a lay teacher, and I saw him at a 21-year school reunion, and I said the single most important thing I learnt in school was on a day we were mucking up on an elderly brother who didn't turn up because he was sick, and he walked in and he's looking around the room because we'd turned the lights out and all that sort of stuff. But it was a phrase, a saying, to be truly free, one must let others be free.
Oh, and beautiful.
It's a variation on to do unto others, basically. So if I want to feel free, then I really have to let you feel free.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful message. And I definitely don't, that wasn't the Queensland or the school that I grew up in, for sure. I think, until 1991, there was a law, which was just the beginning of high school for me, there was a law, and it was a sodomy law, and it was unnatural acts against God. And that law encouraged people to ring in their neighbours and dob them in for having consensual sex between two men, and police officers rounding people up at gay bars and public places and etc. So for me, I definitely, I think there was I felt like there was a religiosity in the culture, and surroundings.
With that sort of background that you're there now, you're in your secondary schooling and you're making choices about your education, what subjects you do, what are you going to do after school? What sort of was happening at that point with that sort of, I've got to make decisions about where I'm heading?
To be fair, I couldn't see a future for myself I really struggled to see myself into the future, like what job I would do, who I would be. And I found, like, even some of the messages I was sort of sharing before about people sort of saying you got to grow up at some point. And I feel like there was a dread within me of like that meant sort of getting married as a woman to a man and having kids and having jobs and, you know, having a real restriction on my life. I remember that I just couldn't really see where I was going to go, and that, you know, was a bit of a dark, to not see a future is quite a dark experience, and there really wasn't people that I could look to as role models in any way. Like I had no sense of the person I could be. I mean, the first time I understood that there was a transgender man, I was 19, and I watched Boys Don't Cry, which is the true story of Brandon Tina. So I say that I first understood my identity through the story of a trans man who was raped and murdered. And, you know, like it was not an affirming story. And I took away from that, one, that we existed, but that it was an existence that was unsafe, scary, and unloved, right? Like, and so I, you know, I just felt like I was living a bit on borrowed time as a teenager.
With that in mind, were you able to talk to your parents about how you're feeling?
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I remember one time going, so by the time now, you know, I'm in high school, I'm at an Anglican high school, and if you had an issue, you had to go to the brother, you know, who was assigned by the Anglican Church to be at your school, employed by the Anglican Church. He wasn't even really employed by the school. Anyway, I wanted to talk to someone about, and the only way I understood myself at this age was as I thought I might be bisexual, homosexual, but I had no sense of gender issues. I sort of thought, well, maybe I have to be a lesbian because that's the way I could express my gender, my masculine side. You know, I was a bit confused about all these things. And by this time I'd had some independence, and I was trying to, wherever I could, get a copy of Brother Sister, which was the street magazine. You know, prior to Star Observer, Q News, there was a magazine called Brother Sister. And I would go into the city to pick up this street paper. So I had a sense of like there's a community out there. Really, I thought the community was drag queens and gay men in bars, because that was the representation in the papers, really. And so I started to emerge with this idea of like, maybe I'll be a lesbian. So I'm at high school, and I think, well, I've got to talk to somebody. So I concoct this sort of story up, which is, I thought was clever, but was very thinly veiled story, that I would go to the brother and tell him that I want to write an assignment on homosexuality. So this is probably 4 years after the decriminalisation. So it's barely been legal. And I think, I mean, he would have known that I wasn't going to write an essay on homosexuality. It wasn't part of the curriculum or anything. But I sort of thought, oh, if I go to him with a school-based issue, maybe we can have a conversation. And I remember I told him, you know, I want to write this story. You know, what's the church's opinion on homosexuality? And he knocked all these things off his desk. Like it was like such a, he was just sort of, he was like this, and he was like knocking things around, and then he was sort of like under the desk and picking things up, and he was so uncomfortable, so uncomfortable. And all I sort of got from this was he basically said to me, you know, it's one thing to have these feelings, but you can choose not to act on them. You can be this way, but you don't have to act on it.
What that does, and it just makes you even more frustrated because, I'm not allowed to talk about it. I'm not allowed to deal with it.
Frustrated from this experience, I did go and talk to a teacher at school who was like a life education class. And she definitely wasn't there to be a counsellor, but I thought she liked me, and I talked to her. And when I told her, she said to me, you can do that if you want, but you'll never have children. And you need to reconcile, which meant homosexuality, you need to reconcile, as a woman, never having a child. her advice to me.
Yeah.
Like sort of, and
So not a great deal different from the brother.
yeah, and also again another dark message, another kind of like it's not going to be good. And of course, that's not true. I have a baby now, but you know, like in my life now, I have a 9-month-old baby. But you know, it wasn't true. And but that's how she saw it, and she thought she was giving me good advice. I think she wasn't malicious. She was just kind of I think she too was thinking, do you want this bad dark life? Let me be the truth teller of this.
The challenge of finding somebody to talk to is always difficult. You know, so how did you manage to find somebody to actually have a proper conversation with?
The next step I could see was that I would go to university. And it's funny, when I think about it, I never really thought about going to university for a career. For me, I thought this is the place that I'll go to find myself. Like, again, I wasn't thinking far into the future. I was thinking it'll be a bigger world at university.
Yeah.
And that in some way, I'll find something there. Because I really held up an ideal of university being a place of debate and open-mindedness, and that this would be my escape from the Queensland suburbs. You know, I lived an hour and a half on the train out of the city. I lived in the deep suburbs. You know, I felt like university would give me some freedom. So that was why I went to university. And that's when I started to find people. There was a queer collective on campus. And I remember one of my friends dragged me to a coming out workshop. And that was the first time I'd heard the word coming out. By now I'm 19. This is prior to seeing Boys Don't Cry, but that was later in the year. Must have been when I was 18, first year of university. And she drags me to a coming out workshop. And the only thing I remember about this coming out workshop is that it was in a basement, like no natural light. And we went down. But again, you got to remember, this is so close to decriminalisation. Like this is now, it's maybe 7-8 years after decriminalisation. Like people, it is not like you know, it's not a really affirming place in Queensland still at this time. So we went down this basement, and I remember they got us to stand on a line, like a rope, and they said, "Oh, one end is you are nowhere near ready to come out, and this end is you're really ready to come out." So the idea was nobody there was out, because we're going to the coming out workshop. And I stood at the end of ready to come out. I never really thought, I didn't know the word really. I'd learnt it, I think, that day, coming out. But I was like, I was like, I'm really ready to come out. And then I remember one of the workers took me aside and she said, when you come out to your parents, you need to hold a space for the fact that they may never accept this. So this is me coming out as homosexual now, and she said, don't think that if you go home, that their love for you will necessarily mean that you'll get a good response. Because I think she was just like, you're in an affirming space now, and you're going to walk out. And I was probably really pretty revved up by being around all these people. But it always stayed with me, that thing. And it was useful advice.
One of the pieces of advice I sort of talk to people about too is that I worked out very early in the piece that one of the worst things you can do is jump out from behind the tree and go, ta-da. Shock and awe. They might not say anything at the instant, but further down the track, adverse reactions come out later. What did you study at university?
It's interesting. When I first went, I did religious studies, because I thought at this time going into university, my thought was that a lot of the problems in the world were because of religion. This was just the thought process I had. You know, lots of wars were caused by religion historically. That I see it far more complex now, but that's how I saw it. And I thought, well, maybe if I can understand religion a bit more, I'll be able to be useful in a place to, like, you know. And I've always been very interested in religion. I think it is really an interesting thing, whether you're a believer or not. And I soon realized that the people who study religion are often people who want to go on and preach it. So my course was full of young missionaries, right? They were just about to, it wasn't actually, I thought it was going to be this big intellectual pursuit of like religion, but a lot of it was learning religion in order to like, be a missionary or a preacher.
So you end up graduate. So what did
So
you do?
I didn't do religion, but so I did a semester of it. But then I settled into history and gender studies.
Yeah.
At that time, it was called women's studies. You didn't have gender studies there. I feel like I'm a lifelong student of history. I'm really interested in history.
Yeah.
I think you have to understand the world that you live in.
So you graduate with your
History degree.
Yep. Where did you go from there?
Well, it took a long time at university. So, halfway through my degree, I'd moved to Sydney, followed a girlfriend there. I'm still not living as an out transgender person, but I'm really wrestling with it. I would say I wrestled with it from 19 to 40.
When did you finally make the decision, no, I've got to transition?
When I was 40, during COVID. So 5 years ago.
Yeah.
But I knew as clear as day when I was 19 and earlier. And I had numerous experiences along the way of exploring it and thinking about it. And I just kept going backwards, what I would consider like backwards and forwards, sort of like coming out and wrestling with it. There was different factors at different times that sort of pushed me back. I think that overwhelmingly, though, the reason why it took so long is the world around me. I could see how other trans people were treated.
Yeah.
I could see how hard it was.
I didn't start genuinely dealing with this side of my life until I was almost 50.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, right.
Yeah. Sort of, because, even though my wife had sort of tried to get me to go and see counselling at various times, and I'm sort of going, I can overcome this. And in the end, it just gets so strong that you've got to go and seek some sort of help.
I think the big thing for me was COVID, interestingly enough. It was during COVID. And I think it was the idea that I was going to die in this body, the body that I had then.
Yeah.
I was like, I can't die this way. With never having tried, because I knew in my heart that I wanted to do this. It was always a matter of when. Once I'd made up my mind, which was 19, I thought it's inevitable, it's going to happen, but I felt like I could just keep putting it off to some fictitious time that would somehow be perfect and better, or at least better than that now. Yeah. And also I think it was probably like thinking I could sacrifice myself in the fact that, because it felt like something that, it felt a bit selfish. Yeah. It's a hard emotion. I don't know if you relate to that, but I felt it was maybe selfish to transition for what it would do to some of the people around me. Yeah. But eventually when COVID happened, and we were kind of all faced with this idea in the early days of COVID that we might die from a virus, right? And I thought, and it was just like this bolt in my mind of like, I cannot die without trying.
So were you in Sydney then, or had you moved to Melbourne?
No, I was in Melbourne. I was in Melbourne. And like I got my, the first sort of bloods and injections and stuff during COVID. It's hard to think of really positive things from that time, but it was somehow I needed that. That was the positive thing for me in that time.
What about then now outing yourself to your family?
By this time I was working at Switchboard, but I was identifying as non-binary. So I was sort of on this journey of already talking about, being in that spectrum, that gender diverse spectrum. Which I knew that non-binary was not where I wanted to be, but it was for lots of people, it's their destination, it's their comfort zone, that's their place to be. But for me, non-binary was a transition for me. It was my dressing, if you like, a holding place, because I couldn't bear any more within myself. So this was probably when I was about 36. I couldn't bear any more to be she'd, heard, to be. So I grabbed that like a life raft, the non-binary. So I was already done some of that kind of coming out in the sense of asking people to use they, them pronouns, which, you know, is its own battle and hard.
Yeah.
It was interesting, like, even though I was working in a really supportive workplace, which is Switchboard, as a CEO of Switchboard Victoria, it was still really hard to come out. So I probably was about maybe 6 months on testosterone, and I started to get some and I was like, I'm just going to tell people because they are noticing and I need to take control of this narrative. And I know, because I sort of, when I started taking testosterone, I gave myself permission to be like, this may not be for me. Because I thought, oh, I can I'll start it, and if it makes me feel really bad, I will, you know, it's very reversible in the early days. You know, the first year you're on, you know, it depends how you do it, but you're on very low dosage. Everyone starts on really low dosage. It's very reversible probably for the first 6 months. So I felt like I was giving myself some breathing room without having to come, like my transition was just me. Only me and my doctor.
When did you really sort of say, now I am out and this is who I am, and the impact that, you know, the impact that it had on your life?
When I just started telling everybody that, I was a man, and I was gonna, probably become a man is probably how I thought about it. And that was at 40. I'm on testosterone. I think I started telling people that I was on testosterone. I had an all-staff meeting and told all my staff at once, which of course they were really supportive, but it was so funny, I was shaking even though, you know, even though I knew they would be supportive.
That's revealing your innermost, deepest secret in a sense, isn't it, to others?
I think how it felt for so long was when other people don't know and I don't tell them, I can always go back like I'd always done prior to that. Like as long as it's your secret, you can always retreat from it, right? But once you tell people, you can't retreat from it. And I thought, if I start telling people and then I change my mind, wouldn't that be the worst? Like, but as soon as I started, every step I took towards becoming a man, even though I had this idea in myself as like, oh, maybe I'll start this and I won't like it. But every time I took a step in the direction, it just got better and better. I actually felt good. I never regretted any. I loved my first testosterone shot. I loved everyone after that. Every time I told someone, I just felt better. Like I held this space for myself of negativity that it could be disastrous, it could be bad, but it never was. It was always, not saying that people necessarily were good or to me, but how it felt inside was good. Because I didn't realize with each time I said it, each time I affirmed myself, each time I did something for myself, medically or socially, I just felt better. I didn't realize how much I was like, how unfree I was.
You said you obviously work for Switchboard.
Then,
Then the opportunity comes up to apply or be nominated to be the Community Commissioner. What was that like?
I'd followed the other commissioners, you know, through my job, like starting with Ro and then Todd, and I was aware of the role. In previous times, it never made sense to, it wasn't the right time to apply for the job, or there was other people in it, but I would genuinely didn't, I was doing other things. I was being the CEO of Switchboard. But when this job was advertised, I thought this is the right time in my life. At that time, I'd been at Switchboard for 7 years. By the time I left, it was 7.5. But I was like, this is about the right time to leave. And I felt more affirmed inside myself. I think it was very important that I had reconciled my transgender self, and I was out and I was proud in order to be the commissioner, you know, and had self-actualized. And so that was part of it. That was really important. And I was coming towards being done with, as in I'd been at Switchboard for a long time. It was time to look for something new. So it was the right time in my life. It just felt right. I went through the process. I did 4 interviews, and at the very end, you've got to be selected by cabinet. They've got to approve you, the cabinet of government and the minister. And in those 4 interviews, I really went into the interview process saying, I'm going to be myself. They're going to know what they're going to get. So, you go in there and you talk about your agenda and what you want to do with your role. And I was really clear with that about that how I wanted to be, what kind of things I was going to fight for. Because what I wanted to be is I wanted them to choose me because they wanted this agenda. They want to, so through the process of the interviews, I even became even more clearer about what I wanted to do. And by the 4th one, I was like, God, I really want this. When I first applied for it, I thought, do I really want this? Do I really want what is ultimately a lot of responsibility? But by the 4th one, it had helped convince me along the way.
So you obviously got selected in relation to the agenda that you were putting forward in the interviews, to actually being in the job. And have you been able to match what you were hoping to do by being in the job now? Yes.
I mean, there's more to do. There was a couple of, I would say, ethical questions I went into it with. One was, and strategic, but one was that I wanted to be really transparent and accountable to my community, to the LGBTIQA+ community. I wanted to be accessible and accountable to it. And that was where I was going to do things like media interviews and things and talk about my agenda. And I was also going to release newsletters and really report back to community what I was doing. And I think I have been transparent and accountable. People know what I'm doing. People know what I stand for. And I think that's been true to who I am. I also committed to a couple of things. One was getting the intersex reform through, which we've still got to see that, the intersex, legislation that will protect intersex children. I want to further gender affirmative care. I want to defend it and I want to further it and I want to make it more accessible for people. And I do that. And that is not something I as one person will do, but I want to spend some of my time championing it. The other part of it is I want to make sure that LGBTI people are seen in their diversity and their ages and stages, and we think about people as part of families. So we consider LGBTIQA+, and I do in my portfolio, think about, which is what I put to people, is not just the LGBTI person as a sole individual in the world, but what about their kids, their partner, who may not be part of the community, but thinking about what about the grandparents, thinking about the person that wraps around them.
That's right.
And so I've come with a family agenda. And I bring that in my messaging and advocacy to government. So
do you find, are you getting any pushback? Because we see what's happening in other parts of the world. Are you getting much pushback in your role?
I do a lot in my role of reassuring people to stay the course, publicly and internally. Victoria is doing things that don't exist in other states and territories or in other countries. The Royal Children's Hospital, and we're the only state that has safe schools, for example. There's no trans organisations at scale like we have in Victoria, whether it's Transcend for Parents, Transgender Victoria, Seahorse. We don't actually have these organisations in other, Zoe Bell, we have these things here that no other state and territory have. So I feel like my job is about fighting for those organisations, Thorn Harbour Health, Switchboard, AGMC. I can name them all.
It's a very broad connection with many aspects of community life, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think for me, part of my role, and that was also part of my agenda, is making sure that those organisations that are currently funded continue to be funded. That's not. That doesn't sit solely with me, but I want to spend my time advocating for them, and I did in the last budget cycle. Having those conversations in a really hard fiscal environment. At least can we keep what we currently have and defend what we currently have, and that's what I've taken, we can't go backwards. I really believe that in Victoria, whether it's the Royal Children's Hospital or TGV or Thornham, these organisations, we have things that the rest of the world looks at with envy.
Yeah.
Look at the situation in the UK and the US.
Yeah.
People are fighting for their lives,
Yeah.
like they really are.
I've been out and about for close to 25 years almost. But the Melbourne in particular, and more broadly probably Victoria as well now, but Melbourne was very accepting of difference. I just go anywhere. I'm here to do the same thing as everyone else. I'm here to shop or go to a restaurant. I'm not needing to explain myself, and that I've personally been very well accepted in all the things that I've done just by just turning up and doing it and not going, oh look, I'm an icon of something. Yeah, so I think Victoria's been a leader in a lot of things in the world.
I find immense hope in everyday people for sure. I think unfortunately the thing I find probably is these active, negative voices that want to sow division and hate, that get a lot of attention in the media.
What are really the highlight for you in this role?
The incredible people that I get to meet.
I'd like to thank you joining me in the conversation of your story.
Well, you're one of the incredible people I got to meet.
Thank you. I'm Greer McGeary. My guest has been the Victorian LGBTIQ+ Community Commissioner, and thank you for watching Ben TV.